Today I want to tell you why I'm glad I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes about 15 years ago. Even though to date, I've had to take about 24,000 shots of insulin just to be alive. But when I think about it, and when I look at the last 15 years and the internal process that I had to go through, diabetes itself was not the real gift. What I am most thankful for is that I did not have a choice when I was diagnosed, and that was the real gift. The absence of choice was the gift. On the right-hand side on that picture, I was just 28 years old when I was when I climbed Mount Everest, and I'll never forget the day when I had to hug my mom goodbye and board on that plane to Nepal. And what I could see in her eyes was that she knew that there was a chance that I wouldn't be back. I then went on to complete many Ironmans. I ran across the Sahara Desert, 250 kilometers, self-supported in 5 days. And last year, I ran across Canada, a 7,200 kilometer journey. I ran a marathon a day, almost every day for 9 months. And when I started running, I noticed something pretty interesting. I noticed that whenever my favorite song would come on, I would feel invincible. My pace would increase, I would start running over capacity, I would feel unbeatable. And the same thing happens in races when we approach finish lines. You start sprinting, and you find that energy that you had no idea was there. So I started to wonder, and I asked myself, what if we could feel like that all the time? What if we could set goals that seem almost impossible and accomplish them every single time? What if? When I was a kid, again on the right-hand side on that picture, I didn't feel like my favorite song played in my head all the time. I was that kid who was picked last every single time when we had to make teams in high school. And then at age 22, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and everything changed. And then again, when I look back at the last 15 years, I learned so much from the obstacles that I chose, but it's the obstacle that I didn't choose that gave me the strength to go for my dreams. And 15 years later, I would never give diabetes back, even if I could. And of course, there's things that I don't like about it, but what I would never give back is that concept and notion of a vehicle. And that's the first thing the obstacle taught me, to switch my beliefs and to turn the obstacle into a vehicle of growth, a vehicle of self-exploration. And the disease taught me that the obstacle and the vehicle is never good or bad, that the power is in the driver's end. So if you don't choose the vehicle, you can choose where you're going to drive it. And even better, the bigger the obstacle, the more powerful that vehicle is going to be, and the more opportunities and the further you will be able to go into fulfillment. I'll never forget the 2 months that it took to climb Mount Everest. I have amazing memories from it. But to my surprise, the most powerful step of the journey was not the last step. The most powerful step was the first step. See, I had been dreaming about climbing Mount Everest for years. Ever since I was a little boy, I was reading books about Mount Everest. I was watching documentaries about Mount Everest. I inspired to climb it. I was so inspired by everybody that went. And I realized that when I took that first step above base camp, the dream was mine. With that first step alone, I was climbing Mount Everest. So that's the power of the first step. To commit to something today that might not be possible tomorrow, but to trust that you will find the strength to make it happen. And trust the obstacle. Trust that if you're clear on the destination, the obstacle itself might just show you the way. So you make the obstacle a vehicle, You take that first step, and then what? You dance with the obstacle. You don't try to beat it. You don't try to overcome it. Nobody overcomes Mount Everest. Nobody beats Mount Everest. You dance with the mountain. And you take the obstacle by the end, and you take it with you. One of the most powerful experiences with my disease was to find out that it would never go away. So for some years at the beginning, I tried to be stronger than it. I tried to beat it, but that was just a very exhausting way to live my life. And the moment I realized that if I made it an ally, if I was using it to produce positive energy. See, resistance creates energy. That's one of the most basic laws in physics. So I had to apply that to my disease. Almost everything I've done in my life has involved the practice of change. You need to adapt, try new things, get out of your comfort zone. So I had new athletic ambitions. I wanted to run across the Sahara. So to meet the change and to adapt doesn't mean to start from scratch every single time. To change and to adapt means that I'm applying everything that I've learned before to a different situation. I did not know that sand dunes moved. They're beautiful. They're the size of that building, big forces of nature. And a week later, that dune could be a kilometer to the right or a kilometer to the left. So how do I get that song to play in my head all the time? I work like the wind. The wind pushes the dune away. And if it blows at 200 kilometers an hour for only 5 minutes, the dune's not going anywhere. But the wind doesn't have to be very strong. As long as it's consistent, then you can move mountains. So what the dune is teaching us is that it's never the size of our actions that matters. What matters is frequency, consistency, and the sincerity in between every single action. And the dune is showing us that even the smallest action have that transformative power. And the dune's telling us to always be in movement, to get moving, whether it's physically, spiritually, intellectually, psychology. But as long as you're doing a little bit all the time, you can move mountains. So all of that was great. I was doing well, I was learning things, but something was missing. I didn't feel complete. And at one point in my life, I realized that what really mattered was not necessarily how high you climb, but how many people you bring with you. So I decided I'm gonna run across Canada, 170 marathons in 9 months, and that is going to be the least important part of the project. Instead, what we're gonna do, what we're gonna focus on, is to build a platform. We're gonna make it impossible for 3 million people in Canada living with a form of diabetes not to hear that favorite song in their head all the time. The run was not a fundraiser. All we wanted to do is to allow people to get opportunities to move. I wanted everybody to own the run across Canada and everybody to be a part of it. So on February 2nd, 2014, I stood on a starting line. And friends were there, family was there, media was there. It was so exciting. Best of all, 20 kids, also living with type 1 diabetes, who were gonna run the first kilometer of that historical journey with me. And everybody was excited, but I remember standing on that starting line thinking, this is a bad idea. This is gonna hurt a lot, and soon, and for a long time. And I was scared. I was totally scared. And somehow, that felt exactly the same way of what I felt when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I had to go back to another very important lesson why I'm glad I got type 1 diabetes. The very nature of the disease makes it impossible to perfectly manage it. Therefore, the focus needs to be on learning. I have to focus on learning so that I can improve my management. I have to stop chasing trophies and medals, but instead create, nurture, and sustain growth habits. The learning there was that success is only just a point in time. It never lasts for very long. That's an event. I stood on the top of Mount Everest for 5 minutes. So to create and to reward people, and that's something that I even transfer in the business world now, instead of just rewarding people on numbers, we must learn to reward our employees based on the creation of growth habits that support the true goal and mission of the enterprise. Another thing that I had to apply in order to be able to cross that finish line was to ask myself the question, do I have what it takes? And I found a lot of comfort when I realized I didn't. So to seek experiences instead of success means that we're expendable. That's what you learn when you shift to experiences instead of just summit. You learn that you're expendable. And when you assess what's possible or not, you start involving that future dimension of you to decide if the goal is possible or not. So don't set goals based on what you are and what you can do today, but set goals based on what you will become. And then everything becomes possible. So I crossed that starting line, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran. And we traversed some of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet for 9 months, and we learned a lot. We learned that the right place at the right time happens a lot more often when you're out there every day. What I did last year add value, add meaning, not because I won medals, not because I came in first. It had value because myself and the team were out there every single day. We learned that if the reason why is bigger than the obstacle, you can overcome anything you want. We learned that if we just focused on doing today well, tomorrow would come a lot faster and a lot easier. So we never really thought about the finish line. In the Sahara, day 5 was an 87-kilometer stage. I finished in the middle of the night. And when I crossed that finish line, I was so exhausted, I could barely walk. I have never suffered so much in my life. But I crossed that finish line victorious, with both arms in the air. And when I looked around, I noticed that it was pitch black and that there was only one guy waiting for me, sitting on a plastic bucket, holding a flashlight and a pad. He wrote down my bid number and he said goodnight. And I stood there thinking, that's it? Nobody was there to tell me how good I was, how tough I was, how great I was, and that was fantastic. And then we learn to set goals, expecting no one at the finish line. And when you do that, that drive, that song starts playing even more often. And sometimes people do wait for you at the finish line. When we approached Vancouver, BC, when we approached the finish line, things had changed. People felt different. People still lived with diabetes. But what they thought was possible had changed. We did not tell them what to do. We did not share best practices with them. We just created something they could believe in. And that's been the most rewarding experience of my life. Thank you.